thrilled to be welcoming our speaker for the day. And thank you so much for carving some time in your busy pandemic schedules to be here on Zoom again. I hope nobody has run a Zoom marathon since morning and is fatigued now. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Mays Imad. By training, she's a neuroscientist and she's currently a professor of pathophysiology and biomedical ethics at Pima Community College in Arizona. She's also the founding coordinator of the Teaching and Learning Center at that school. She is a recipient of the Gardner Institute Fellowship. And Dr. Imad's current research focuses on stress, self awareness, advocacy, and classroom community, and how these relate to cognition, metacognition, and ultimately student learning and success. And I have to add a few words that she has shot to fame during this pandemic with her trauma informed pedagogy piece that was published in on Inner Science. I think it was higher ed, inside higher ed. And that attracted a lot of traction where she informs educators and also gives them active recommendations for helping students to cope and thrive during this pandemic, which I believe is very, very important. So today she has an interesting talk lined up, and I'm going to turn it all over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sammy. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. And I always like to begin by I want to say gratitude for my mentors and my teachers who have really helped me to get to where I am here today. And I want to invite you to just to reflect on the people that have helped you to get to this place also, and give gratitude to them. So what I want to share with you today is some of the research that I've done with respect to what is it that matters to students in their education, what has their experience been, and how does that relate to inclusion. So I'm going to share the screen with you. So I titled this presentation Beyond Techniques, Phenomenological Approach to Inclusive Teaching. So I am interested in how to create an optimal learning environment. How can I make my classroom a learning sanctuary, if you will? And to do that, I'm going to use a phenomenological approach, and I'm going to explain that in a second. So we're going to look at phenomenological approach, and we're going to look how that ties into creating an inclusive classroom. So I want to bring in some of the work of Parker Palmer, who's an educator, and he's written a lot about the contemplative education and what does it mean to teach effectively. So in his an article, and then he actually wrote a book called The Courage to Teach. He talks about the tangles of teaching. And he talks about three factors. So he says the tangles of teaching have three important sources. The first two are commonplaces. So he described the first as being the subjects that we are all teaching are, they are as large and complex as life. So our knowledge of them is always flawed and partial. This is part of the reason why we're lifelong learners. We go to conferences, we're constantly learning. And then he goes on and he talks about the students that we are teaching. They are larger than life and even more complex. To see them clearly and see them whole and respond to them wisely in the moment requires a fusion of Freud and Solomon that a few of us achieve. So, what I'm going to say here is we don't need to be Freud or Solomon or both. We need to really tune in to the students and understand their experience, their perception, their expectation, and align that with ours. So, Parmal also talks about the third complexity, and I'm going to come to that at the end. So, question is, who are our students and why use a phenomenological approach? So, phenomenology is a branch in philosophy that is concerned with the individual, my perception, my experience of a phenomena, something that happens, of an object, of an event, and that becomes the basis for investigating the reality. So that becomes my basis. And for you to understand my perception, you would need to really get into to listen to that experience. So how that ties into teaching is how can I have knowledge of my students' world or experience as it really is to them. And this approach has been used in education. And to use this approach requires a lot of not just um, quantitative methodology, but also qualitative. So you do open-ended, you do interviews, you do focus groups with students to really to try to get to the heart of their experience. So I want to begin actually by talking about how I got to this point. And so I'm going to ask you to come on a journey with me that is going to give you a short history um, of, of how I got to this. So I do a lot of what I call reflective exercises in my classes. And so what I mean by that is I'm always inviting the students to keep a reflective learning journal. And in this reflective learning journal, they follow a rubric. And so they ask, so the rubric is telling them, um, explore your understanding, your perception. Where are your confusions? How does it relate to information that you've obtained before? And the idea here for me to use this metacognitive approach is for the students to be able to form connections between what they learned, what they are learning, to sit in the knowledge, if you will. Now, the students have a reflective learning diary, and I also have a reflective teaching diary. And so I try to model what this reflective exercise is. And my reflective teaching diary is online, so students can look at it. And so an example would be um, we're going to look at the eye. We're going to look at vision. And I am going to start by telling this story that connects us to what the eye does. And the reason I'm telling this story is because when I was a graduate student, and so I'm being intentional to explain why I am going to present the lesson the way I will, but I'm also being intentional to model to the students how I form connections. So I want to show you over the years what I've seen from students is they follow this rubric, they give me a learning journal, but there's always they write things in their journal that are trying to get my attention, trying to pay attention to something that is bigger than this. And so I'm going to share with you a few examples. And I say that the theme of those examples is that the students are disenchanted. Those are STEM students. Um, so here's a student that says, I wish we can talk about the news in the classroom, right? This is a student that when I followed up with them, said to me with actually tears in her eyes that we're often asked to leave everything behind when we come to the class. And when the reality is that when they are sitting in the class, they can't disconnect. This was this was actually a couple of weeks after the murder of Eric Garner. And the student was saying that's all she thinks about, right? Another student wrote here that I feel I am attending a school for robotic education. It feels suffocating and so far removed from the real world. There is no spontaneity nor beauty. And I actually write about this in an article where I say, you know, this I guess part really kept me up at night. You know, am I offering my students a robotic education where it doesn't move their heart, it doesn't help them feel enchanted? And when I turn into my colleagues at my institution and even outside and ask them, do your students care about spontaneity in art? And there was this always this reflexive, um, no, they just want to get a job. And and I remember a postdoc I was mentoring said to me, but biology is full of beauty. And I thought, but how often do we focus on the beautiful within biology? And then a third one here is where a student says um, how hard life can be on you on some days, and how drab and dull the world feels without passion. I wish my teacher knew just how badly some people struggle with the weight of the work and the world as we as you try to wiggle your way through the tight and unrelenting cookie cutter format of the educational system. So I got enough of um, those feedback that I began to, it was blatantly obvious for me that my perception of what students wanted out of their education, out of their STEM education, was not aligned with um, what they actually wanted. Right. And so I embarked on this really quest to understand what matters to the students. So those are the questions that I asked. What do I think students want to get out of their education? What do I hope? And really, what really matters is what do they actually want? And and that leads to how can I ensure that my perception of what students want align with what they actually want. And the question that I ask here is, why does this matter? Why does it matter that I align what students want with what I am giving them? And perhaps you could reflect on it, and you could maybe either unmute yourself and share with us, or you could put it into the chat. Yeah, why is that important? Let me clarify the question again. Why is it important that I have an understanding of students' perception and expectation of their education? So I see Heather writes, I think it has a lot to do with connection to the material, that they want to interact with the material to learn. Erin, thank you, says for them to be motivated to participate and learn. Um, yes, why is it important that I have an understanding of students' perception and understanding of their education? So Jeff says it makes it easier to know how to get them to care about the material. It creates an environment where learning is motivating, engaging. There's relevancy. Um, that's a great example. A good writer, a nice analogy, knows their audience, and um, those are all great. It helps you to learn how to teach and reach the students. So thank you um, for joining us here. So one of the things that I keep going back to is this is one of my mentor who is he's a professor, he's a psychiatrist, and he is also an indigenous healer in Senegal. And I often ask him, how can I be a better teacher? And he says, teaching is like healing. When the students are coming to you, they want to learn more about the world. They want to learn about themselves. They want to go from point A to point B, where point B is is hopefully more enlightened, more empowering than point A. And then he goes on to say that when you want to become a healer, you must begin by forgetting about yourself. And he would say, oftentimes, he would say, you got to tune in to the students. And so I wanted to tune into the students. I wanted to learn more about them. So between 2017 and 2019, I performed this research with students at Pima Community College, but also with students at the University of California in San Diego. And this was the question that I wanted to investigate. What matters to students in their education? So I could then learn about that and align that with with how I serve them. So the journals, the learning journals that I have from the students inspired the study. And so it was quantitative, and it was also qualitative. And I want to share with you both data, but I'm really going to focus on the qualitative. So what I did is I wanted to investigate students' understanding of themselves in the classroom or relationship, and then their relationship to the community, to their peers, to the professor, and also to knowledge. And so I want to focus on one of the questions. So we had over 1,000 sample size, and I want to, and actually, I'm not going to send you to breakout room. We're going to do it here. I want you to take a minute to describe what your optimal learning environment is, and then to think about what do you think students describe their optimal learning environment is. So um, this research here was done on students who were face to face, and also there were at least 200 sample size that came from students who were online students, but this is pre-pandemic. So so I see hands-on lecture followed by open class discussion, a lot of fun, exploring prior knowledge. Uh, so a hands-on application, whiteboard to draw, a place where I can openly discuss and share my opinions, face-to-face, experiential learning, discussion. Again, there's face-to-face, peer comfort, or peer-to-peer learning. So those are all great, interactive, problem solving. Awesome. So what I want to share with you, I'm going to share with you representative writing from students. And I want to say that the sample size, like I said, it was over 1,000. We've analyzed over 800. And what I'm going to show you is overwhelmingly representative of what students wrote about their optimal learning environment. So here's a student who says professors should foster stimulation to keep the students mentally engaged in the subject matter and that they are capable of owning it. Another one wrote, I think it makes it better for the class if the teacher talks about their personal life and listen to other students' lives and stories because it really brings the class together and it's more of a relaxed environment. When the students have a better relationship with each other in the class, then more students will be involved with activities and again, feel more comfortable in the class. Another one factor that I would find helpful in creating an optimal learning environment would be helping the students to get to know each other for a few minutes when the class starts for the semester. Professors can create an optimal learning environment by building relationship with students and making themselves available to those who need help. And then I would like to know more people I can relate to in the class. If the professor helped facilitate that, it would help me. I can join study groups then. So this notion of relationship was overwhelming. And it was relationship to the professor and relationship to the students. And it didn't matter whether we were looking at San Diego or four-year institution, community college. Part of the study also looked at dually enrolled students, so they're still in high school and they're taking college courses. The theme of relationship was astounding. And I should say that this is nothing new. People have written about it for years. The Wabash National Study, which is a longitudinal, um, several thousand sample size, when students were asked what matters to you in your education, they said one of the things they said is getting to know our professor, right? Relating to the professor. So when I took on the left here, this is coming from the quantitative data. Um, when I took all the items from the quantitative data and I did a multivariate analysis to see if there is any theme that emerges, what happened is the theme that emerged is that student wanted to feel empowered. There was what I call the humanities or meaning behind their education, and then the community. And that combined with the qualitative data, what the conclusion of the study for is that what matters to the student is having a sense of purpose. That what they do in the classroom, what they do in this assignment has meaning. It has a context. It has also an impact. The students also wanted to have a sense of autonomy, that they have a voice and that voice matters, and they can advocate using that voice. And then the last is having that sense of belonging. And so they belong to a community inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom. Very few of them, less than 5% of the respondent talked about rigor and active learning, and overwhelmingly this idea of relationship is what really matters to them. And I suspect that post pandemic this is going to be even more important. So I began to think about, well, when a student comes to us, right? This is a student that drew this. What we're hoping to do, what I'm hoping to do is, or when I was a student myself, I went to the class. I wanted to really, it's shaping my identity, who I am as a person, who I am as a human being, And we do that through what? Through relationships to the people inside the class, but also outside the class, relationship to the professor. And importantly, there is this relationship that we are helping to cultivate, the relationship with the unknown, with knowledge, with discovery. And so, um, before I go into practical strategies for for aligning my perception with my students, I want to ask the question, what does this have to do with inclusion?
Well, I'll say something. Are you wanting an unmuted response?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
could write or unmute yourself, and yeah.
yeah. Well, there's always the students who are going to do well in your course, right? There's the high performers, and they always form sort of a clique. And I'm a big believer in relationship building can be facilitated by the instructor because a lot of times students don't know how to school. And so they don't know that they need to be in a study group. Whereas the students who know how to school, they will instantly form a study group. And so I think facilitating relationships is a part of incorporating inclusive teaching into your classroom.
Hmm. Thank you. So students need to feel connections with the professor and the rest of the class to be included. Um, so some students are going to feel isolated, very difficult to feel connected and form a relationship if the student feel that they are an other. Not sure what QEP is. It helps with learning. Uh, so so um, for me, if I'm going to offer, if I want to be inclusive, I want to also know what matters to the student so I could be inclusive of that. So when I go to workshops on being an inclusive instructor, there's there's usually a list of do's and don'ts, and those are really useful, but they're generic, right? They approach the audience as a one size that fits all. And I'm going to use them, and I do use them, but I'm going to go a step further. And this step further is really getting to know the students, getting to know what matters to them. And so to create this inclusive learning environment, I can be inclusive by not being excluding, right? And so by default. And then I think, well, what does it mean to be intentionally inclusive? And I'll take it even a step further and ask the question, what does it mean to be radically inclusive? Now, this word radically is loaded and it has been politicized and so on. But if we look at the word radical, the root of the word radical, or the meaning of the word radical, it comes from the Latin radicalis, and it talks about the root. And so, what I'm interested in is getting to the root of what matters to the students. If the students are sitting thinking, what does this have to do with my community, right? If the students sitting thinking, why isn't anybody here talking about the shooting that happened? If the students sitting thinking, right, then I am being inclusive of them. I use the right pronoun. I make sure I call on the same, not the same, but on everybody in the class, etc. That's all great, but there is something that is at the heart of that students that I'm not even paying attention to. Right? So so in this research that I do, it is my way to not assume that I know the audience. It is my way to move away from this one size that fits all. That's why I call it beyond techniques. And um, and I'm going to actually talk about. I'm going to I'm going to come back to this at the end. So I say I have a guiding principle, and I'm going to explain what I mean by this. Okay, so I know that I want to know who my students are and I want to offer radical inclusion. What principles am I going to follow to do all of that? And I want to share with you what I've been, I guess, reflecting on over the years. So I want to be intentional, not by default, and I want to be transparent. So I talk a lot about why inclusion matters. And I do a lot of storytelling when I say, so I'm using this exercise because my intention is that it's going to foster community or inclusion, and then I say why it matters to me. I'm constantly asking students for feedback, and so I'm going to show you an example of this question. And I think it's really important to reflect on, for me, how do I want to be treated? Not all the time, but especially when I feel vulnerable. And I think a lot of times students come to us and they are in a position of vulnerability because there is, no matter how much I want to break the dynamic, there is a power dynamic. I am the one that is going to give the students a grade. So there is some vulnerability there. Learning is not one size that fits all. And this is a deeply reflective process. So I am constantly having dialogue with my colleagues, with former students. I look at the classroom as a place where I do a lot of observations to see what's moving the students, right? What's triggering them even. And so I'm committed to learning new ways. I am not going to follow a set of do's and don'ts if I see that it's not clicking with my students. And I always assume that I have biases. And part of that is just the way we work, the way our brain works, that we come with biases, but I don't stop there. I'm going to preemptively try to mitigate their impact. And so, and when I catch myself, I try to be compassionate with myself so I could continue to understand why I have that bias and what can I do about it. The ninth one, I think this is more important than ever, taken for granted that we are all experiencing chronic or traumatic stress, and definitely our students. And so to that, it's really important to use an intersectional lens. This is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And she talks about, when you have a person that comes in and you're working with them, that person comes in with multiple identities and those identities intersect. And so I have a student that is a single mom and a student who, for example, comes from low socioeconomic background, and a student who is who's African American, and a student who is a DACA student. All of those things forge who they are, right? And their experience in the class is going to be unique. As a result. And then the last one here is one that has been really, really guiding for me, is what Bell Hooks talks about in her Teaching to Transgress, that we don't want to just be inclusive. Being inclusive is wonderful, but we really want to move from inclusion, diversity, equity, justice to a model of an education where it's liberating. And it's mutually liberating, both to the instructor and also to the students. And in that liberating mutuality, this is where the teacher and the students become work in a way that it is more of a partnership. What does it mean to co-create knowledge in the classroom? So those are the guiding principles, if you will, that I use in my teaching. And so I want to pause right now, and I want to see if there are any questions before I go and to share with you examples of how I bring meaning to the class, for example. And you could either unmute yourself and ask the question or put it into the chat.
Hi, I guess I'm thinking about how you balance it, how you put all this relationship into the class, but you still teach the subject.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the relationship that I'm trying to, I do a lot of modeling. And so if I'm presenting a topic, and I'm going to show you, I try to connect the dots, how this relates to the outside, how this relates to me and to my community. And there are days where I don't do it. There are days that we're just focusing on the content. And also I don't completely do it myself. Once I establish relationships with the students, then there are exercises where I'm asking the students to, for example, work with each other, check up on each other. Good question. Another question?
Maze, hi, Jeff Olimpo here.
Hi.
It's nice to hear you. I was gonna say hear you talk, but I'm enjoying your talk thus far, I guess is my point. I just wanted to, and this is not so much a question, I feel like as an observation,
Mhm.
but thank you, and also kind of raise the point of the fact that it's very evident and clear that you're doing this iteratively, and so I think sometimes this may seem like a checkbox, right? Like if we do something right at the beginning of the semester, we like tick the box off that, yep, okay, we've done the inclusion thing, right? Or we've spawned collaboration or tried to engage students. But that whether it's through journaling or any kind of other activity that may foster this type of interaction, that you're very both intentional, right? Which I think is very much appreciated, at least on my end. Intentional and doing this iteratively in a meaningful way so that we recognize that student situations and our situations, right? The human kind of condition, if you will, is constantly changing and that this is dynamic. And so you said the word, I think, Band-Aid earlier, right? And that resonated with me that this is not kind of something we can just attend to once and kind of say we've done our job. But that this is going to change. I mean, I don't know. We can think about time scale. And I guess my question was probably that, right? Do you have a sense doing this iteratively if there's a threshold? And I say that not, again, to go back to this notion of like, we've done enough and now we're good, right? We can kind of clean our hands of it. But if you have kind of a working sense of, particularly if we're struggling with balance, right? Thinking about this, which was raised just a moment ago, this balance between kind of content and all these other competing demands. If there's a more practical way to think about, like, sure, we want to reasonably, like, it would be reasonable to check in this frequently, right?
Yeah.
Or it's been really impactful to diversify the types of prompts that students are responding to rather than just asking the same prompt repeatedly, right?
Yeah.
That so if you had any thoughts about that, and sorry if
Yeah.
that distracts you from where you were going.
No, this is a great question. So let me break it down. You said a few things. This notion of I don't assume I know so every encounter I have with every semester, every class, I do a mini study, if you will. I'm not intending to publish it, or I want information for myself. Who is my audience? What matters to them? What examples am I going to use? What humor will I use or not use, right? So this is a commitment to the process. It is iterative. I cannot, I am changing, the students who are coming to me are changing. Number two, what I am seeing overwhelmingly over the years is that students really want more than the content. They are looking to form relationships. They are looking for connections between the arts, the humanity, meaning making, purpose making, connections. To that, I will say that we, as a scientific community who are interested in science education, we will need to re-examine how we teach science. And what I mean by that is, what does it mean to have a curriculum that one of the objectives is also to help students make meaning, find purpose, feel enchanted by the knowledge, form a what Laura Randon talks about, looking at knowledge as not a dualistic thing. Here is knowledge, here is me, and I can either access this or not, but rather that I become integrated with that knowledge. This is a huge undertaking that's going to take us years. And it begins with small things we could do in the classroom. And if you're wondering, this is so much, what can I do? Actually, they are the subtle things that we could do that matter most to the students. And I want to show you some of them where you could take the same assignment that you've given for years and you tweak it a little bit to infuse intentionality and meaning in it. So I hope this answers the question, Jeff.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I want to share with you some examples of some of the things that I've changed in the classroom. And so I think about, okay, so the students, they want meaning. What does it, right? And so I think, what makes something meaningful for me? And I love this quote from Lawrence Kushner, who talks about what is it to have meaning? And he brings it back to relationships, that it's a matter of relationship. If something is connected to absolutely nothing, then it is meaningless. And in the same way, if something is connected to everyone and everything, it's supremely meaningful. So what I want to do, whether I am going to lecture or give a group exercise on Zoom or in the class, I'm going to help the students form the connections, connect the dots so they could see. And so our nervous system can see that, oh, there is meaning behind this. I'm not wasting my time, right? So I ask the students to make connections. So for example, this week we are going to, so I do this before every lesson. This week we're going to learn about osmosis. Osmosis is a biological mechanism that helps us stay alive. As we learn about osmosis, I would like to take a step back and I want to, consider, what does osmosis have to do with your life and the real world? A lot of times I say, why should you put energy into this, right? And I also, in my teaching journal, and those, they're not paragraphs. A lot of times they're 2 to 3 sentences. So I model to the students. I chose this assignment because for me it relates to X, which speaks to me because of Y. I'm trying to model to the students that learning is social and emotional. So here are some assignments where we've made connections. Actually, the first one, it was inspired by a student who, when I asked that question about what does osmosis have to do with your life or the real world, the student researched the question and came back and said, wait, in South Africa, there is water scarcity and they're using reverse osmosis to deal with that. So all of a sudden, there is an assignment in the classroom that has a social implication. I'll go over the second one. Second one, a lot of times in my, when I try to explain about variables and x-axis and y-axis and so on, students struggle with it. It's very abstract. And so who are my students? A lot of my students come from low socioeconomic background. A lot of my students care a lot about social justice from the data that I've gotten from them. So I began an exercise where we look at, where are the payday loans located? What are the zip codes, right? And then we start looking into, we graph them. We look at causation versus correlation. I'm introducing something here that is going to immediately say, what does this mean? Why are all the payday loans in lower socioeconomic zip codes? And I don't leave it at that. Then I give them an optional group assignment where we ask the question, what can we do about it? What are some other ways we could, you know? So how can I cultivate empowerment? And the question that I ask, when I feel vulnerable, what makes me feel empowered? And for me, when I feel vulnerable, or when I feel, let's say, unseen, what helps me feel empowered is knowing that I have a voice and I have a choice. So I begin, this is during the first week of, and it's I tell the students, I'm going to ask you to give me feedback throughout the semester. And I tell them with an open heart, I say, look, if I want to be a good teacher, it's work in progress. And I know I'm going to have blind spots, that it would be wonderful if you could point them out to me, because it helps me become a better person and a better teacher. And then I say, do you feel comfortable giving feedback? Most of them will say no. What does it mean, constructive feedback? They don't know. So I guide them through it. I show them examples of, this is a feedback that I could work with. This is a feedback that is so obscure and hurtful. I don't know what to do with it. And so we do this. At the end of every week, I send the students with one optional question. And the question is there anything I am doing or not doing that's making you or your classmates feel excluded? So they have a voice. What about a choice? Well, one of the things, going back to bell hooks, is liberating mutuality, is what does it mean to co-create? So I have this in my syllabus, and I've been doing this exercise, or this for several years. Is I tell the students, I know that life happens, and sometimes you're not going to be able to do well on an exam or a quiz. So you're going to have a chance to retake any of the quizzes. But I know I can't rewrite everything. And so I'm going to ask you to write a quiz and submit it to me before you want to retake it, so I could review it. And so the students are creating materials that I could take and use it to help them show that they've learned it. What this has done is it has helped me create a huge repository of questions. And I put next to each question the name of the student that authored it. And then I include them in the midterm or the final exam. In my syllabus, I also invite students to advocate for their classmates. And so, I say, how can I help you succeed in this course? But I also impart to them that we have a relationship to our classmates. How can you and I help our classmates succeed in this course? And sometimes, depending on how busy we are, I create a Google Doc and I ask students to put their ideas in there. So the community and the sense of belonging is really important. And I want to speak specifically to this online environment. I've been, in my introduction to the students, talking about why community is so important. And then asking, what can we do to create community? Right? How can I make this better? So here are some examples. I do a virtual handshake. And so I would say, Penny, nice to meet you, right? And then just very gently invite the students to talk about their name and also to tell the story of their name. And so Penny, tell us the story of your name, or if they feel comfortable and I'm modeling that. And I do that every time we meet, right? When students have their cameras off, what I say is, I don't say, please turn it on, blah, 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 but I just very lightheartedly, I say, oh, I miss being in the class and I would love to see your face. And you could, let's play a game. Turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. And I just want to like model to them that, just come when you feel at ease, play with it. I encourage the students to learn each other's names. And I also say that, look, we're physically separate, but we could still tune into each other's compassion and humanity. Right? Tell me, how can we do this more? And I'm going to show you an example of advocating for the classroom, for the classmates, or being part of a community that actually is pre-pandemic. So this is from an exam that I gave. And at the end of the exam, students were asked to tell me the name of one of the classmates who doesn't sit next to you, and why I should give him or her or they a 3-point extra credit. Advocate for that student. Now, what I've seen over the years, first of all, I've never had a student leave this empty. And what they write about their classmate is remarkable. So in this case, this person wrote that, give this extra credit to this person. She's intuitively paying attention. She's asking important questions, etc. And so what I do with this, as I read it, I think I go back to the student and I say, it's so beautiful what you wrote about your classmates. Do I have your permission to share it with them? And I've never gotten a no. And then I go to the classmates and I say, somebody wrote something beautiful about you. Your classmate advocated for you. Do you want to see it? And I've had students cry when they read what someone else wrote about them. I had a student say, I didn't know people knew my name, right? This instantly does what? It helps the nervous system relax. Oh, people know my name, they care about me, they want me to get extra credit. And instantly, I've seen it where after the first exam, there's a pivot in the classroom where if I'm taking attendance and I say, where's John? People start texting John, right? See, is John okay? So it's also sometimes when it comes to, and I'm gonna wrap this up, when it comes to when we face academic challenges, what happens to the brain if I fail? We don't deal well with uncertainty. And so the brain's going to say, do I belong here academically? Do I not belong here? And so I talk a lot about, I tell stories about what does it mean to fail? And what does it mean to feel, to have uncertainty, and that they are setbacks momentarily. So I'm coming to an end here. I want to share one more assignment with you. And this assignment is coming from the Irish philosopher, poet, John O'Donoghue, who talks a lot about what does it mean to cultivate a pedagogy of interiority. And that when a student feels comfortable with themselves, with their inner world, the outer becomes easier. So an example of this, when we talk about what does it mean to be a living cell or to be alive, or I bring in an exercise from John O'Donoghue where he talks about the connection to the living. And he says, what does it mean to create a clayography? What is my clayography? And we get into, in this case, it really shifts the way we look at climate change, the way we look at issues that deal with life and death. And students love and really dive into this exercise. So I have a lot more examples I'm happy to share with you, but I'm going to stop here and I'm going to bring us back to what we started with earlier, where the third complexity of teaching is what Palmer says, the teacher. We teach who we are. Teaching, like any truly human activity, emerges from one's inward for better or worse. As I teach, I project the condition of my soul onto my students, my subject, and our way of being. And so it is really critical, especially now, that we continue to reflect on this question um, of what my student one time says, teachers should reflect on why they do what they do. And the question for us is, why do we continue to do what we do? And with that, I'm going to stop, and I want to take questions and suggestions from you. Here, I'm going to look at the chat.
I'll have a question. There's a couple of us in this room who are part of a fellowship program, and we've been talking about diversity inclusion, using a particular rubric this week, and it talks about human bias, and it talks about sort of bringing up human bias, and I'm like, oh, that's probably a lot easier to do in humanities. How do you do that in biology, talking about human bias? And so we have a couple examples of that we can talk in biology. Henrietta Lacks, what happened with Watson Crick and Rosalind Franklin. But what are some like ways that we can address human bias in a transparent way in biology that you know of?
Yeah, so I mean, one way we could be philosophical and scientific about it and talk about the brain and implicit bias and so on. And I do some of that, but I really want to get into the, if you will, the heart. What does it mean to other, right? What does it mean to um, to to disconnect from the unity, if you will, our unity, our collective unity. And so I bring in some of the work. I think, who was it that said poetry is the language of the inarticulate? Oh, someone important, like an important poet. I can't believe I'm forgetting. Okay, well, so I bring in a lot of poetry to get to this, what happens when we feel discomfort and when we come across contradiction. What's happening to life, if you will, at the micro and also at the macro. I talk about, I show data of what happens when we experience microaggression. Why does it cause the stress response? You know, and again, it's this reducing the community, if you will, the collective community. Yeah, there are a lot of examples. I use some examples, and I also ask the students to bring examples.
Thank you for that. You made me actually think of an example as you're talking, which is the bias that exists when someone's forced from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic nervous more than others. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
I have a question.
Yes.
I wanted to know, this is Diane Jordan, what is your class size and how many students do you generally teach?
So it's usually 24 to 30. And about I teach 3 classes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I showed you is work that is coming from years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be safe and comfortable and grounded to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
So there are days where I walk into the class and I don't feel safe for whatever reason. Maybe it's my sympathetic nervous system is more active that day. That day, what I do is I do less of this experiential, heart-centered, and I just focus. And so I try to And then in this pandemic, I've been trying to focus on one or two things. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Virtually, how are you getting your students to come to the virtual class and engage? I mean, I do a lot of these things already, but if they're not there, uh, I mean, other than giving them a point or two for something, it has to go a little bit deeper than that for me. And like this morning, I had the teaching the second survey of biology. And so we're doing the immune system. So naturally, you know, they just, I don't know, maybe they were sleeping because I teach these morning classes, but it's like, come on, you guys. This is the perfect segue. And I start telling them, what is the campus doing for you? Before you can come to the classroom, why is this so important? The coronavirus and COVID is directly related to what I'm teaching. Come on, talk to me, people. And so how just first getting them there is an issue. What are your thoughts on that? And I'll shut up.
So what I've learned is, and it's working so far. It doesn't matter how cool I am or what music I play, or it works with some people. It doesn't work with a lot of people. It's their classmates that are bringing them, right? And so think about it. If you hear a rumor that this restaurant is a badass, is like amazing, you're gonna go to it. And so I devise these things where I have students that come all the time, and I said, help me out. Let's spread a rumor that you come to the class and it's so much fun and so on. And I started seeing more and more students come in, and it usually takes like 2 students turn on their camera and they say something, and then sometimes I turn off my camera, right? And I say, I'm going to step away for a little bit. I don't think I'm intimidating, but there's something about just wanting to be with their peers, right? And I come back and I see like half of them have their cameras on. So word of mouth, spreading rumors, classroom is like the best, awesome, whatever. And then I do just, I don't have a virtual background. And then I say, like, genuinely, I wish I could see your face. Yeah.
We had one question in the chat box. I think we maybe have time for that one. It's from Bree.
Oh, yeah.
And it says, can you explain how to implement the methods you suggest in the short lecture during a whole semester? Also, when do you take time to review and revise during the semester or after the class is over?
I review and revise during the semester because I'm getting feedback a lot of times from them. This example wasn't culturally responsive because of whatever, or this was, I just remember using a joke from pop culture. And there were students in the class that just couldn't laugh. They didn't know what I was talking about. And they felt like, and they didn't tell me, don't use this example. They said, just elaborate on it for people that don't see this show. So I revise, and part of the revising during the semester is to show the students that I really do care and I want to. And then the methods, and then the first question was, let's see here, explain how to implement the methods suggest in a short lecture. In a short lecture, so what I do is when students come, I start with, why does this matter? Right? And this becomes a narrative that they create throughout the semester. So I give 2 minutes to it, why this matters, for example. And what I'm trying to do is a lot of times our nervous system, we're an autopilot, right? But if we just ask the question, why am I here? Why does this matter? And I write about it, one sentence, it helps us focus. And so I explain to the student that, and they're on board. They see that I'm not just doing this willy-nilly hippie stuff. There's a reason behind it that I'm asking them, let's center, let's ground ourselves.
Yeah. Maze, I think you're making a really good point, which we've been talking about this concept of previewing, which is a part of the study cycle and how you preview to give context to what you're about to learn. But you're also bringing a good point, which is let's preview the purpose of why you're in the classroom, which is a great way to ground yourself in the context of the classroom as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and give an reaction, which is thank you so much for being with us today. And we really appreciate, and I feel really inspired. I'm sure everyone else does. I'll stay on here for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions, or Maze, if you want to stay on, if someone wants to talk to you one-on-one, if you have time, great. But we'll see you guys for the next seminar. I should know the date by now, but I'm going to send out information. And if you aren't getting that information, let us know. We'll add you to the email list.
Thank you. I'll end with a story. You know, a lot of times when I do these, I think, how are they going to receive it? And I don't use language I don't use language that could be misinterpreted, like centering and grounding and embodiment and mindfulness. I don't use any of that, right? I just say, let's remind ourselves why we're here. And so the students, one class, you know, they're like the exercise we do. And I had to miss a class. And the student said, what about our exercise? And it was so important to them that they had that, whatever, centering exercise. And I said, well, you know, I can't ask my colleague to do it. And they said, what if we do it? What if one of us sits? And it was really empowering to see how much that matters to them, that going in and connecting with their purpose and meaning. So
Well,
I'll
thank you so
stick
much.
around if there are any questions.
Yeah. And I will as well if anyone has any questions.
One more quick one.
Yeah.
Primarily, how do you motivate non-science majors, or you strictly teach STEM majors, right?
Oh, the non-science major are the easy ones, actually. Okay. And here's why. Okay. Oftentimes, there are so many misconceptions about the applicability of science to what they're going to do. And so I learned, what do you want to be? What do you want to be? What do you want to, right? Economics? Well, let me show you. You want to be an architect? Let me show you. And a lot of times I say, how can you, what I say to non-major is, you are going to take one thing from this class that is going to be with you, that's going to make you a better candidate for your dream job. And it's, you know, I haven't formalized that project, but it's something where, you know, I say, what is it? Is it going to be your, you know, graphing skill, or is it going to be your data mining skills, or is it going to be your journal article skills? So I've had actually a lot of paralegals that come to my non-science major class, and so it actually can help you because you have the technical the ability to read technical science stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to share just one thing that, first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciated your presentation. And I'm originally from Cuba. And you could see my name, Mary Phillips, but that's not my name. My real name is Maria Eugenia. And when I came to this country, they changed my name. I was now Mary. You know, feeling a sense of belonging and, you know, being in this country. But the thing is, my sister's name is Maria Elena. So we both became Marys. And so, you know, it didn't bother me until, maybe after college, you know, where I began to kind of form my identity. And I thought, okay, so like, what am I? You know, and I'm Cuban, I'm a Cuban American. But I worked very, very hard at the beginning of the semester to learn their names. And some of them are, you know, names that are very difficult to pronounce for me, but I I make it a point because they'll say to me, "Oh, just call me Mikey," and I go, "No, no, no, that's not your name," because I think there's that identity with the name, and so I just wanted to share that because, you know, you talk about how we bring ourselves and our soul into what we do, and so I always share that story with my students. Go, "No, no, just call me Joe," and I said, "No, no, no, you know, I'll call you whatever you want, but you know that's not your name." But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
I love that. I really love that. And that's part of the reason why I do the story of your name, right?
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I say,
Yes.
so I give my name, and then I talk
love that.
about how in high school the teacher changed it because it was hard. You know, was it Maze or May? So she just called me Misty, and and I just like I had broken English. I just went along with it. But I talk about why my name matters to me. And I tell the story of my name, the one that my mama told me. And then I invite them to. And so what I've seen is sometimes I forget how to pronounce your name, but I know the story, right? And if I'm stuck pronouncing it, I remind you that I know the story still.
That's a great icebreaker. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that idea. I just love that. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
You too. Well, thank you. I won't keep you. I know you're busy, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Mary. See you later.
Bye.
Bye, Diane.
Bye. Bye-bye.
And then there were two. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Those two are really interesting. They're part of the fellowship, and they've both been teaching for like 40 something years. And the other fellows are like only been teaching for a semester, and we just had this really beautiful experience with those two all the time of their wisdom.
Is.
And the fact that they're still like, oh, I'm still in that. Oh, I'm still learning. Oh, I want to do this.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm like listening to Diane. It's like, I want to be in her class. Just her energy is really, yeah. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
All right.
Let me know. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.